You are now rocking with BizMode. Let's get into BizMode. What is BizMode? BizMode is entrepreneurship at its highest level. BizMode is flow state. BizMode is that hunger pain you feel. BizMode is success by your own definition. BizMode is operating from abundance. BizMode is what you make it. This is BizMode. What up, though? I am your host, Alex Bruno. I am the founder of Bruno Group Inc., a California law firm helping entrepreneurs and businesses with their legal stuff. BizMode family, Alex Bruno here. And if you were listening to us in real time, we are getting close to wrapping up this year. As we finish out this calendar year, our thoughts turn to the new year and the opportunities it can bring. Some of you may have goals to fundraise using crowdfunding. In its early days, I saw crowdfunding as a gimmick, a place where you can buy a recipe for potato salad or get your name in the credits of a movie. Now, crowdfunding has grown up and is democratizing fundraising. It provides a vehicle for anyone to become an owner in a company. Our next guest, Kathleen Minogue of Crowdfunding Better, has been consulting entrepreneurs on their crowdfunding campaigns since the early days of rewards-based crowdfunding. As a lifelong educator, she coached entrepreneurs, businesses, and social enterprises on successful campaigns, whether such campaigns were donation, investment, or rewards-based. I also credit Kathleen with her efforts to raise awareness about crowdfunding to communities that may not have ready access to capital, including women, people of color, and rural entrepreneurs. I'm also thrilled because my chat with Kathleen is a preview to the theme of our fourth season coming to you in 2021 about founders and funders. I'm sure you'll get some gems from this episode. Please note how Kathleen highlights that your story, your particular story, is as critical as your product when you're executing a campaign. Kathleen also provides us with an outline as to what elements will make for a successful campaign. Well, enough about my takeaways. Take a listen to my chat with Kathleen and let me know your thoughts and the gems that you get. All right, talk soon. Kathleen, welcome to BizMode.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, and it's good to have you on. So why don't you tell us, why don't we start by you telling us about Crowdfunding Better?
Let's see. Crowdfunding Better provides education, strategy, training, and support to help entrepreneurs unlock alternative capital, particularly when they're not a fit for traditional capital. We also provide plug-in support services for small business advisors and platforms and accelerators and incubators, anyone who wants to learn more about crowdfunding or help others learn about crowdfunding.
Well, you have it. You have your cogent summary. I love it. It's like
Can you tell I work with entrepreneurs all the time, helping them refine their pitch?
Yeah, I know you got your pitch down. Yeah, I totally tell. That's good. So tell me and tell our audience what inspired you to start Crowdfunding Better.
Well, we could say it was almost by accident. I had been a stay-at-home mom to my daughter, and then one of her friend's moms at her school asked me to produce her film, which was interesting because I had never produced a film before. I do have background in theater, but she said, no, I'm sure you'll be great. And what that really means is I need your help finding the money to make the film. And I didn't have any big, pocket investors I could, bring to the table. But it was just about that time that there was the first $1 million campaign on Kickstarter. And so it had hit the press, and I said, this is really interesting. And I brought it to her, and she was crazy like me and said, sure, let's try this thing that nobody knows anything about. So we did. We researched it. We did whatever prep we could find was recommended on the internet. We raised the money. We made the film. The film went to film festivals. It's available on Amazon still today. It was called Ending Up. And after that, people started asking me, how did we do that? How did we raise that money? And so I helped people sort of on the side. And then I had a mentor who said, you could make a living doing this, which I thought was nuts because it was 2012 and, who had ever heard of crowdfunding, much less a crowdfunding consultant. But I was still taking care of my daughter, so I could take it on as a side hustle, which I did. And I worked at first with a lot of filmmakers. They are still my beloved clients. And really, they're some of the most successful crowdfunders. And then a few years later, so that was 2012, in 2016, actually it was a little bit before that, my husband got cancer and he passed away in 2016. And I had a choice. Was I going to go find a job somewhere else, or was I going to take this side hustle and make it truly a business that could support me and my daughter? And I chose the latter, and have been building, against, I'll say, the current a little bit for the last 8 years. And they say that it takes 8 years to be successful as an entrepreneur, to sort of take your business far enough. And I'm definitely seeing that year 8 is a lucky year.
Oh, good. I mean, and we talked about this offline a little bit, but I'm grateful for you sharing that journey. And you have gone through a journey as an entrepreneur yourself. So how has that felt for you going through that?
Well, it's interesting because I think I'll start by saying it really helps me to help my clients, because I think I bring an enormous amount of empathy to the table. Number one, I've run a campaign myself, so I understand how terrifying that can be. I've started a business, pretty much all by myself. And so I know how many questions there are and how embarrassed you can be sometimes about what you don't know and not know who to ask and not know who you can trust. So, it really was, I'd say a lot of trial and error, a lot of trying things and failing, many nights of wanting to throw in the towel. And then the next day the phone would ring and something good would happen. And so you pick yourself back up and you say, okay, I'm going to stay the course. And it's been a lot of building relationships. I think, in year 8, looking back, I can see the value of the relationships I built early on. Just this morning, I was on the phone with Bill Houston, who is a great colleague of mine in the industry. And he's been in the industry for about as long as I have. So he's one of us crazies who, started way back when. And, the value of those people, those conversations, they don't have financial value necessarily, but the camaraderie of someone, he and I joke, well, who else could I talk to about this? Who would really care about this issue in crowdfunding? So I would say, I've learned a lot about the value of those colleagues, the ones who, you have for a long time and can just talk to for real.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And I wanted to kind of reflect back what you've said. You said you've categorized yourself as one of the crazies. And in a way, this is not really a question, but it's more of a statement. In a way, it's not so far off, because it sounds like so long ago, but back in 16, back in 15, crowdfunding might have been seen as a fad, right? But now it's an industry. And there's
prior
not really
to the Jobs Act. Yeah. What I'll say is, I still get that. It's not even completely in the past. What I'll say is that in the last year, since COVID, since the pandemic, that's when things have shifted. That I'd say 2018, I would have gotten the same response of like, is that a thing? Can you do that? Or people don't think it's real. They'll say, oh, that's where people take your money and don't give you anything in return. There's a lot of that out there. But what's happened in the last year because of COVID is that people are looking for solutions that are not traditional, because the traditional sources of capital have dried up. Venture capital has gotten very conservative. Banks have gotten conservative. And so people are saying, hey, what else do we do? And so the conversation around crowdfunding has grown. There are businesses that are still standing because they have crowdfunded, or they crowdfunded right in that point where nobody knew exactly what was happening, back in, March, April. And crowdfunding platforms, although they saw a little blip right at the beginning of the, stay-at-home orders, the volumes have held steady. If you're a board game producer, this may be your best year ever to launch a crowdfunding campaign on a rewards platform, and investment platforms are seeing their highest volumes ever of people investing in private companies. So a lot has changed in just a year.
Wow, it's just amazing how an event can accelerate things. I mean, just anecdotally, the idea of offering video chat to many people now is not a big deal. It used to be such a big deal, but now with the everyone's zooming everything, quote unquote. When a client wants to come into my office, I can say, we can just get on video, and all of a sudden, it's not weird. So that's very interesting.
True.
So you mentioned, like, you got your start, you were producing a film, you were a producer, and you helped raise money. I'm just out of curiosity, is there a reason why, like, movies or films are somewhat successful in crowdfunding?
Yes. I think it has to do with fans. And so here's some history on crowdfunding that not a lot of people know. Most people see crowdfunding and they think, truly, GoFundMe. They think it started in the nonprofit sector. And crowdfunding began with online crowdfunding began with a British band called Marillion. They didn't have the money to go on a US tour. Their label wouldn't pay for it. So they went out to their fans and said, hey, if you will pre-buy a ticket to the show, then we can afford to come and do the show for you. And their fans did, to the tune of $60,000. And they were able to come to the US. And after that, there was a platform called Artist Share in 2003. It actually still exists. And it was musicians who would crowdfund the capital to create their next album. And so really it's the artists, and not surprising to me because I am a former performing artist, that the artist would come up with a creative way to raise capital, that's where it began.
That's interesting, but that also, like, I totally understand it now as to why there's a high success rate, because you have a good base, and maybe we'll probably get into that a little bit further. I have a question or two on that, but I wanted to know, in terms of you've worked over the past 8 years. You've worked as an advisor to many a company. Some have done great. Some maybe have not done so great. But if you could pinpoint, like, a trait or some kind of element that would make for a successful company, not necessarily a campaign, is there something that you would say, what, if they have this, they're going to be in a great situation no matter what? Is there something you can identify or pinpoint?
Organization. That is the trait. You don't need to be the most skilled, but you do need to be the most organized. And that's both for rewards or investment, because to succeed at crowdfunding requires preparation and systems, a process. It isn't reaching out to your audience once, it's reaching out multiple times. It's coordinating communication. It's remembering who you spoke to and when you spoke to them, and following up appropriately. So that organization underneath a company, and having a foundation where it's not haphazard. You have systems in place.
And you've also mentioned, having the ability, the organization, and the processes to outreach to your audience. Is there, or I'll just ask it like this: is email still the king or queen of outreach?
That's a great question, because people think it's social media, but email still is king in crowdfunding. And I just saw data from MailChimp that says more so during COVID, that even more so that email has become one of the most powerful tools to reach your audience. And you said it, Alex. I mean, one of the things that, if besides the trait of the company, but what helps people succeed in crowdfunding is having fans, whether those fans are customers, whether those are people who are fans of you, because maybe you're just starting out and you don't have a company email list or a company social media channels, but do you have people that you've kept good in touch with well and know how to reach? So I think that you were right on it with having that group of people.
Nice, thank you. So I would, for some of us, because there could be some of us in the audience that may not have a basic understanding of what crowdfunding is. And so I come to you, or let's say I come to you, brand new novice, just learned about the internet and just learned about crowdfunding. What are you going to tell me?
Do you know what a barn raising is?
Whoa.
Back in the day.
Okay.
Back in the day, on farms, that was a pretty big capital expenditure, but it was also really important. And so what people did in the past was communities would come together to raise a barn in their community. And you would do it one year. And then, when you needed help, 2 or 3 years later, your community would come and support you and help you raise your barn. And that's what crowdfunding is. It's 21st century barn raising using digital tools. And the idea is, instead of being limited to the people who can physically help you raise the barn, now you can reach out via digital channels to people who can help you, whether that is financially or sharing their social capital or their creative capital with you.
Nice. Thank you for that. And then just drilling down a little bit deeper, there are elements to a crowdfund now. So like if you want to raise the barn, so to speak, I guess back in the day you could ask directly for money, and that person giving you the money would expect nothing in return. And there are some now who do say, you know what, if you make money off that hay, using your barn example, I want 10% of it.
True. So, I mean, the technical definition of crowdfunding is small amounts of money from a large number of people. And that can be financial, social, or creative capital. And it's gathered over the internet in general and within a limited time window. And that last piece is really important because it's that pressure that you might miss out that has people act now rather than, most people, if you give them the chance, they'll just continue to wait to take action. So you need to, light a fire. And there are 4 main types. So most people are familiar with GoFundMe. That's in the donation box. So there's donation crowdfunding, but also in that are nonprofit fundraising, raising money for municipal projects. So if people have a community park they want to renovate and the town doesn't have enough capital, can they work together to raise that capital? Universities use donation crowdfunding, schools. I mean, there's a lot of legitimate uses of donation crowdfunding. Then there's rewards crowdfunding. That's Kickstarter, Indiegogo. That is about exchange. So I will give you $25 and then you're going to give me that kitchen gadget that you've designed after you manufacture it. So it's what I call a fair exchange or a pre-sale. There's also crowd lending. So there are platforms like Kiva where you can raise a 0% loan from your community. And I think their loans top out at $15,000 right now during COVID. And then there's the newest piece of crowdfunding, which passed with the Jobs Act of 2012, but the regulations went into effect in 2016. And that's investment crowdfunding. So this is the type of crowdfunding where people can become investors in your company and they can get return on their investment, whether that is through equity, debt, or revenue share, or whatever legal security that you can use to raise capital. But that's the type of crowdfunding where there is this expectation for some sort of financial return.
That's Well said. I was going to say, very, very well said. And so when someone comes to you, or someone's starting to explore the idea of crowdfunding, and you're going to let's say may assist them helping put together a campaign, what would make for a good crowdfunding campaign?
That's a great question. We have this tool that I'll call the self-assessment. And the first question on it is, are you comfortable asking people for money? Because it's not a given that the person who needs capital is comfortable asking for capital. So the first quality is you have to be willing to ask. And then the second piece is, do you have a network? Because you're not going to reach out to strangers first. There is this idea with crowdfunding that you put a campaign up on a platform and people drop by out of the blue. And I'll tell you a story. My mom and dad live in Florida, and their association needs a new heater for the pool. And someone said, "Oh, we'll crowdfund that." And when my mother said, "Well, are you going to put money into that?" And the woman said no. And she said, "Well, that's not crowdfunding if your community is not going to be the first one in." So you have to have a community that's going to support you. And that can be your own customers if you're an existing business, but it can also be the people who believe in you. So I say, the people who are really successful at crowdfunding are those who walk their walk and talk their talk. So if you say to someone that you're going to do something, you're the kind of person that does it. If you're the person who is the first to offer help to someone, because those are the people who see a lot of success with crowdfunding. And then the other pieces are about, are you willing to do the work? Because it is going to ask you to look at your business in a different way. And I was interviewing the founder of Treefort Music Fest the other night, and she was talking about what I call the transformational piece of crowdfunding. She said doing crowdfunding made them look at their business differently and ask different questions. So are you willing to do that work and look and see where there might be, say, some weaknesses in your marketing? So, you may have a great email list, but are you actually sending newsletters? Are you communicating with people on a regular basis? How are you taking care of your relationships? So are you willing to do that work? And then finally, is it of value? And crowdfunding can be a lot of work. So if it's just about the money, there could be an easier way to get, say $10,000 than to crowdfund. But if you are looking for the other non-financial values that crowdfunding brings, like the ability to prove a market or to find individuals to say that they want this, community buy-in. If you're unsure if this is a good project to put your time and effort into, it helps you test your marketing. You can use it to get PR, because there's something about crowdfunding that's more than just throwing a product on Amazon, where you buy that product and you don't really think about who made it. But with crowdfunding, it's always the story of the person who's creating it. There's also feedback. Crowdfunding backers, they're vocal. So they'll tell you what your next product should be if you listen. So there's a lot of non-financial value. And the part that people don't think about is how you can leverage it for other kinds of funding. So that's another thing that crowdfunding can bring to the table.
Right. And we talked about that offline, is that, crowdfunding, you mentioned how crowdfunding can now be, it's actually a good part of your business's portfolio to show that, you're present, so to speak, or maybe you could add some more detail as we talked about before.
Sure. The first thing that crowdfunding does is prove your audience, right? So, if we look at, say, traditional lending, there's the 5 C's of credit, and one of them is conditions. What are the conditions of the market? And right now, say with COVID, there's a lot of questions. But if you run a crowdfunding campaign and get all of these backers who put their money down and say, yes, we want this, that's going to strengthen that loan application. That's going to say to the bank, yeah, there's a market for what I have to offer. you can also say you have like a food pop-up and you want to get a food truck. And so you could use a crowdfunding campaign to get the money to purchase your food truck. But now that you have your food truck, you might have other expenses like inventory or, having some capital to pay some employees. So that food truck that you bought becomes collateral because it's a piece of equipment and can help you unlock a working capital loan. So, thinking strategically about crowdfunding in the way of like, how can I crowdfund a little to unlock even more? I'll give you one other example. There are businesses that can use investment crowdfunding. They can raise a little bit of equity and use that as the equity injection to unlock a bigger loan, traditional loan. So really thinking about how can you stack the capital? How can you use crowdfunding within that stack as opposed to it's an either or proposition?
No, I thank you for that further detail. And I think it's really important for entrepreneurs and companies to kind of see the opportunity that there is in crowdfunding, as you mentioned, beyond the fundraise, beyond the garnering of money. Because I, putting my business attorney hat on, have seen it where you have businesses working on a product so much. They're working on developing a product, but they don't get that feedback. The feedback that a crowdfunding campaign could potentially help you with, which is like you mentioned before, is there a market? And if there is a market, maybe the market doesn't like exactly what you're doing, but they do like part of it. And so that it's a great opportunity of that non-monetary benefits to it. On the flip side, Kathleen, are there situations where there's a company who thinks they should do a fundraise via crowdfunding and they shouldn't? What would that company look like? Or
Right. Well, one very, clear example is if you have intellectual property that you're trying to protect. So you may not want to put it out there for all the world to see until you have secured that intellectual property. So that's an instance where I've talked to companies and they ask that question and it's a dead stop at intellectual property protection. I think it's also about energy. So it may be not a never, but if you are expending so much energy on sort of just getting your company launched and you have no more bandwidth and you don't have any more capital to hire anyone else, then really your best, I believe your best choice is to focus on your fundamentals. And I've talked to companies where we've gone through, we have a road mapping process where we look at your marketing assets and we look at comparable campaigns and really talk about what it takes. And I've had companies say, you know what, it's just not a now for us because we're already at our full bandwidth and anything more and the whole thing could tip over.
That's an important point to for any business to consider when they're trying to try a new vertical or something new. I do want to get back to that question that actually the element you said of what makes good for a good crowdfunding campaign. The first element you kind of said is the willingness to ask for money. Many people from different cultures and different backgrounds have this, how do I say it? Have this barrier of, right? When you grew up with your parents, we never discussed money at the dinner table. You never discussed that. You didn't want to talk about money. It was seen as a taboo. Someone told me recently that, more time is spent on, sexual education rather than talking about money and how to handle your money and finances. How do you help someone who has those layers of on them of like, well, it's not right to ask for money?
We have encountered that before. We did some work with an incubator that worked with entrepreneurs in East LA. And that was one of the cultural things that came up around crowdfunding was that it was really uncomfortable. They were afraid, many of these entrepreneurs, to be seen that they were begging, that they were asking for handouts. And so it was, I'd say, a journey on both sides. On the one hand, what we also learned is that many of these entrepreneurs had to think about themselves differently, so that they had to know they weren't begging. They had to understand that they were offering their community an opportunity to participate in the creation of a business that was going to give back to their community. And in this case, both businesses were very focused on Latino culture. And one of them was focused on bringing manufacturing back to East LA. So really telling the story of we're building this. It's not me, it's an us, was one half of it. And then the other was educating the audience. And this is one of the things I talk about with my clients, why you don't just, the first email or the first social media post is not about money. It's never a financial ask. It's always setting the stage for what's about to happen. So if you phrase it as, I'm giving you a chance to be a part of something, not, I need your help. I'm lost without you. So what are you giving? And in fact, we say give, 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 ask. It's a give, it's a give, it's a give, and then you ask. So are you providing information? Are you providing a service? Are you making something available that is solving a problem? How are you preparing your audience to hear your story? So not just changing the focus of the story, but how are you preparing your community to receive it? And in some cultures, there is a tradition of giving, but it's very focused around need and as opposed to building business. And yet, if you think about wealth generation and think about strengthening the foundations of communities, business is the heart and soul. So we've also talked with a lot of entrepreneurs about, helping people understand that businesses create jobs. And so by supporting them and their business, they're helping to create jobs in their community. And that's been a really effective tool for talking about, there's this myth that entrepreneurs all are these $1 million, businesses, and they walk away with all of this capital. And the reality is that most small businesses are job creation engines. They're not making their founders millionaires. So that's the other piece.
No, I love it. I love it. It comes back to as an entrepreneur, as a person who's trying to evolve, is always trying to reframe and put the right frame of reference on it. But it was a question that came up because even myself, I have that old map of like, don't show off. Like that's the old. So when I'm thinking crowdfunding, it's like, are we showing off because we're trying to raise $500,000, or something like that. So it's always good to get that refresh of no, it's you're building something. You're building for an impact. You're building forward to get into that generational wealth standpoint or frame of mind. In terms of reframing, how have you dealt with that as a company yourself in terms of maybe not reframing, but let's call it like pivoting, like, or kind of seeing you've been around for 8 years and identifying, what, this may not be working, but we can do a tweak and we can make it work. How has that process been for you?
There's been a lot of that, especially because this is such a new industry. So it was, learning and the industry growing as we were learning. You'd think you had it and then it would move. And I'd say there were two big changes. And the first one came with realizing that people who were looking for money were really tentative about paying someone before they had the money. But crowdfunding is a really tricky space where, if you're coaching someone and they don't do the work, everyone would want, can I give you 10% on the back end? And the reality is, if the entrepreneur doesn't do the work, there is no fundraise, and then there is no payment for you, the consultant. So we started looking at fee structures that, worked with what entrepreneurs, the level of support they wanted. Did they just want high-level coaching? Did they want what we used to call, best friend in crowdfunding? Will you be there for me to cry on your shoulder, or, get upset because it's not working, help me solve problems. So that was the first pivot, was, thinking about scaling services to meet the various needs of different entrepreneurs. But the second came with, I really wanted to focus our business on women, minority, and rural entrepreneurs, because I saw that those were the entrepreneurs who weren't getting access to this information and who I felt could really benefit from it. And so I started nurturing relationships with small business advisors and organizations like women's business centers and incubators, so that we could work with organizations under grant funds to deliver services for, at no cost to entrepreneurs who might not be able to afford those services themselves. And that just recently, we partnered with the Women's Business Center in Idaho to launch Crowdfund Idaho, which in fact does provide free crowdfunding training to any entrepreneur who's looking for it in the state of Idaho.
Thank you for telling me about describing it for yourself, how that pivot works. And it's interesting because just a quick tidbit on that. I help companies when they're ready to sell and or ready to purchase someone else. And I've got the same, I used to get that question a lot. I was like, well, if we're able to sell our company, we'll just give you a percentage. And I'm like, well, it's the same thought process of like, well, actually the work is for you to make sure your company's ready to sell. I'm just doing the paperwork. So it's very interesting to hear that back from you in terms of like manage the resources for lack of a better way to say it.
What I was going to say is a lot of people wanted us to be a marketing agency. They wanted us to do their marketing for them. But when they, I never set out to be a marketing agency. I set out to be a consultancy. And so that was one of the tricky pieces, is helping people understand the value of strategy and consulting as opposed to doing it for them. And also the price differential between those two. I hear that, the company doesn't always understand the value of what they've done until they've done it. And just to give an example, we're working with entrepreneurs right now in this program who have only done step one of the process. And yet the work that we've done with them on storytelling, they turned around and said, oh, we just used that in a grant application. They haven't even crowdfunded yet, but they've taken the work that we've done and they've already, used it in another capacity. So, telling that story, what I'd say is figuring out how to tell that story as a business so that people can understand the value of what you're doing has been a very, long arc for us.
Yeah. And you mentioned that's the principal component of crowdfunding is storytelling. So I'm going to ask you a question of like, what does it look like in the future for crowdfunding?
I love that question because about 2 years ago, I was asked that by a colleague, and I don't think it's any less true. The future of crowdfunding is regional. And we have a lot of national platforms. The limits, we'll say with investment crowdfunding, have just gone to 5 million for regulation crowdfunding. So we have a lot of national platforms that are very focused on big campaigns because it's just the mechanics. In order for these platforms to exist, they live off of the platform fee. So the bigger the raise, the more revenue they generate and the more successful they are. And I have no problem with that because I need those platforms to succeed for my clients. But on the other hand, there are a lot of very small campaigns that need a place to go as well. And I feel very strongly that GoFundMe is not the place for small business crowdfunding. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is I don't think small business crowdfunding is about desperation. And so putting your campaign on GoFundMe puts you next to people who have life-threatening diseases and, disaster relief. And I don't think that's the right place for your small business. The other thing is they don't give you the email addresses of the people who back your campaign. And for me, that's one of the most significant things that you get after your campaign closes is the ability to continue to reach out to your backers. So that's another reason. But underneath that is we need places for people to go for community businesses and community and local projects. And so there are some platforms that are, coming up now that are very focused on either a small community, locally, geographically, or there's platforms like Seed and Spark, which focus on creative artists. So I think it's going to become a little nichier. And then I think we're going to see a lot of platforms that either focus on local campaigns or local platforms that are going to spring up, because we're going to need to get to those people who are not doing $5 million campaigns, but maybe $5,000 campaigns. But, in the economies of scale, I've seen $5,000 transform a business. And so I think, we're going to be seeing that in partnership with this small business support. So right now, if you go into the SBA, SBDCs and women's business centers, some of them may know about crowdfunding. I predict in the next, 2 to 3 years that that's going to change dramatically, that it's going to become much more part of small business advisory and assistance, and that's going to drive that local and regional crowdfunding.
So many of us, I'm grouping a bunch of people together. Many of us are we get the shiny object syndrome, which is we want to do the fun stuff, we want to get out there. And I could see a company who is thinking about doing a crowdfund to get really excited about setting up their fundraising and getting all that ready. But there's, like with anything, there's pre-work. So what would you tell them is the pre-work they got to get done? And then maybe it goes back to your organization answer about being organized. But like, what would you tell them before they get all excited about what platform they're going to use?
Right. I'll refer back to my colleague, Bill Houston. He says, the first thing you got to do is build a crowd when you want to crowdfund, right? Like, it's right there in the name. And I'll talk about the typical creator, campaign creator journey. And what we typically see, and the statistic is that over 50% of the campaigns never reach 10% of their goal. And there's a reason for that. And it's that, people don't understand how it works. So usually what people do is they'll Google crowdfunding, they'll pick a platform, they put their page together, they launch the page, then they start telling people about it. They lose the momentum. They get discouraged. It doesn't fund, and then crowdfunding doesn't work. So if we take that process and we reverse it, and we say the platform's the last thing you choose. The first thing you do is get yourself organized. Actually, the first thing you do is understand crowdfunding. So start by doing some research. And I can recommend a course at Crowdfunding Better called the Crowdfunding Opportunity that will give you a tour of the crowdfunding ecosystem and some tools to start to think about it. But the first thing I would do is think about your network and start to find the gold, what we call find the gold in your network. And for that, I mean personal network first. Because statistically, you want to raise 30% of your goal in the first couple days of your campaign. And that first 30% is going to be people you know and people who care about what you do. And if you haven't organized and you don't understand who you know, it's going to be very difficult to reach out to them. So you have to know who you know, organize who you know, and then have a system for reaching out to those individuals. So that's step one. And it doesn't matter what type of crowdfunding you do. It doesn't matter how much you need to raise or want to raise. You don't even need to know when you do that step. But it's getting your network organized. And then the next thing would be, what's your story? And by that, I don't mean, the kind of story you would use to sell your product on Instagram. I mean, what's your story? What's your why as a business? What's your why as a founder? Because people want to know who you are and what inspired you to do this. And they need to know about who you are, because ultimately people don't back the campaign for the thing you're creating. They're backing it for you because you're the one who's going to have to fulfill it. So who are you and why did you come to this, this business idea or this product?
What have we not talked about that you'd want to kind of bring up in terms of crowdfunding? And
I use a term, you deserve funding. And I think this is underneath all of it. And I didn't talk about who I was before I started this. And this has something to do with the You Deserve funding. I mean, my background is I'm a former teacher. I'm a performing artist. I know what it's like to be a starving artist. I, have worked for nonprofits that are barely squeaking by, and year to year, they're hoping that someone will give them permission to exist for the next year. Someone will approve what they want to do. And I think crowdfunding is really important because it changes who gets funded. Because when you change the funders, you change who gets funded. So there's a real cultural shift in crowdfunding. It's like a new ballot box. So if we only let financial institutions and venture capitalists decide what gets made and who makes it, and they're the only ones who benefit, then we're giving up a lot of choice. We can have conversations about wealth generation in communities. And so crowdfunding puts the power to choose, a whole lot of choice that we don't realize we have about how our world looks and who benefits from what we create. It really puts it right back in our lap, but only if we participate. And so I'd say the piece we haven't talked about is our responsibility to support others. So we're often talking about people raising money, but there's also our responsibility to support other people if we want to see change. So, it's not just about getting funding, it's about giving funding. And it's not just about money, it's about choice. And this is really important if you look at, say, statistics on, 2% of venture capital goes to women, less than 1% goes to minority entrepreneurs, 18% of SBA loans go to women. So we're talking about whole sectors of our entrepreneurial world that are not getting capital through traditional paths. And so, what did we miss? It's what are we all doing? I think they said that there's a statistic that 97% of us are not entrepreneurs and 3% of us are. What's the responsibility of the 97% to support the 3%? So it's this: make the choice. Tell us what you want with your money, with your creative and social capital, and then we'll create it.
Nice. That's really nice. So what, okay, a little, speaking of pivot, a little pivot now. What is inspiring you right now? Book, podcast, movie, music?
What is it? It's got to be my clients. I mean, I get the privilege of hearing the origin story of so many businesses. And I mean, just this week, I had 2 or 3 entrepreneurs tell me what they overcame to be where they are. And so, I'd say it's my daily podcast from listening to my clients, listening to the courage and the creativity, and then listening to so many of them. Why are they doing it? Because they want to give back, because they want to change the power structure, because they want to move generational wealth back into their community, because there's a problem and they want to solve it. So, I couldn't say that it's, anything is as inspiring as listening to my clients talk about why they're doing what they're doing.
Nice. It's always great to interact with the clients or people in general and just see, the journey they're going through and getting inspired by it. So, but speaking about you, so what's next for you?
What's next for me? Well, we are in the process of a few really great strategic partnerships for Crowdfunding Better to get our education materials into more hands. So we've been doing a lot of one-on-one consulting. We're now creating online courses that will take the best of what we've learned and make it available at a more affordable price so that we can, help more people to Crowdfund Better. It's not just the name, it's what we hope to do with you. And then we're really looking to do more of those partnerships with small business advisors to make services available to entrepreneurs at no or low cost. That's our focus at the moment as well.
Very nice. And if people, like, again, want to follow up on those, you mentioned some courses, you mentioned just some assistance you can provide. How do they get a hold of you?
You can go to crowdfundbetter.com. You can find us at Crowdfund Better on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Just put Crowdfund Better in and say hello and tell us what you need.
Wonderful. Well, Kathleen, thank you for your time and for sharing so much about crowdfunding and your own personal journey. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex, for having me.
Until next time, BizMode family, this is your host, Alex Bruno, Bruno Group Inc., BizMode podcast. Keep your family first. Always strive for perfection. Don't forget, none of this is legal advice. By the way, what happened to peace? Peace.